It's a testament to the enduring power of Christianity when even its most vehement enemies, through their antagonistic words and deeds, provide stunning testimony to the power of the truth found in the gospel of Jesus Christ. We'll talk about that tonight, so please stay with us. Thank you, and welcome. I'm Father Mitch Pacwa. Welcome to EWTN Live, where we bring you guests from all around the world. Before we get to tonight's guest, I want to mention that today is a feast of Saint Claude de la Colombière. He was a Jesuit born in 1641, and he entered the society, and one of his first assignments was to hear confessions for the sisters at the Pré Le Monial convent, and one of those sisters was Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque, to whom the revelations of the Sacred Heart of Jesus had been given. And she was told by the Lord in a vision that Saint Claude would be the priest that would make known the devotion to the Sacred Heart. And in fact, after a fairly short time of being her director and helping her with the discernment, he was reassigned to England to be the chaplain of the Queen of England, who is Catholic, though married to a Protestant king who was thinking of becoming Catholic. So eventually he got arrested there and suffered quite a bit. And went back to France when he was finally freed. But he was able, through that noble lady, to get the message of the Sacred Heart to the Pope. And the first celebration of the Sacred Heart of Jesus was made possible by that. So he fulfilled that role, and we celebrate him in helping us all to know more about the devotion to the Sacred Heart. Now, today we have a guest who is a Catholic apologist, and he's a speaker who loves to help people understand their faith more deeply and then share it and defend it with confidence and grace. He's the author of a new book called Hostile Witnesses: How the Historic Enemies of the Church Prove Christianity. Please welcome Mr. Gary Michuta. Gary, welcome. Good to have you. You mentioned that you're a Christian, a Catholic apologist. Do you just go around saying you're sorry? What do you do as an apologist?
It sounds like it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, as you know, Father, apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, which means a defense. Mm-hmm. And we're all baptized people, and especially those who are confirmed, are called to bear witness to Christ both in word and deed. So we're all called to be
Scripture says to.
Yes, absolutely.
In 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15,
right,
he says, always be ready to give an apologia, this defense or reasons for your hope in Christ. Right. So you're just doing what your Bible says.
That's right.
I like it. I like it. And you are not only a speaker, but a writer. I really enjoyed, I got your book before Christmas, I believe, and I really enjoyed it tremendously.
Thank you.
What is the approach you're trying to take here? When you talk about hostile witnesses,
well, it's not putting people up on a court stand.
There's a particular movie in which this woman is very angry at the lawyer, and he explains, well, that's my girlfriend, and the judge said, well, that explains the hostility. But in this case, it's not girlfriends or boyfriends they're talking about, it's other reasons they are hostile to Christianity.
Yes.
What do you mean by all this?
Well, you know, looking at what's on the internet and some of the research, especially in the historic Jesus research, it seemed to me that Jesus and Christianity was being reduced down to an idea. And so if Jesus is an idea, then he's just one of many ideas. You could have an idea, I could have an idea, someone might have a better idea.
As a matter of fact, you know, when you look at that study of the historical Jesus, it's called, you know, the Search for Historical Jesus, as one famous scholarly book says, they are reducing it to the ideas of the 1700s.
Yes.
Trying to fit it into the philosophy, the rationalistic philosophy of the 1700s. That's what they're making Jesus smaller and small enough to fit their little philosophy.
Yes, and even extra biblical things. They focus on the meaning of words. Would so-and-so have used this word or that word? And the problem with it, like I said, is if Jesus is merely an idea, then he's one of many ideas. So I wanted to produce a book that will give us a broader view and see that, you know, Christianity isn't just an idea or a philosophy. It's a historic event. God became man and dwelt with us, and he left us the church. And so by giving a broader picture, hopefully I can help pull back and people could see, maybe there is something about this Jesus fellow. Maybe there is something about the church that isn't purely worldly, you know.
Well, one of the things I liked about your approach, I mean, obviously, most of us read the Christian literature, New Testament, and the fathers of the church. And many people have, you know, found their faith awakened as they read more scripture and read the fathers of the church.
Yes.
You take another approach.
Yeah.
Who are these people you're looking up?
Well, I figure if critics won't listen to friendly people, maybe they'll listen to hostile witnesses, people that have an axe to grind.
Well, they feel comfortable in their own hostility, so
yes,
they
yes.
join them.
And what you find over and over throughout church history, starting in the New Testament all the way, I go to World War II, is over and over again, these critics of Jesus and Christianity run up against some sort of truth about Jesus or his church that they can't deny. So they have to sweep it under the rug or put a spin on it or do something to deal with the data so that it's not so damaging.
To their
own
philosophy.
And by doing that, they're bearing witness that, yes, this is a real phenomenon that's happening, even though they by no means want to substantiate the faith.
Right, but they end up substantiating the faith,
yes.
Despite themselves, you know, precisely as they try to attack it.
Yeah.
All right, that's your principle.
Right.
And I think it's a cool approach.
Well, thanks.
What are some of the people who are these people that you are looking at?
Okay. Well, like I said, I start in the New Testament, and there's lots of opposition to Jesus. And so what I do is I pick out certain areas where they make some sort of concession or, like I said, spin or sweep under the rug that affirms something. For example, the quintessential hostile witness in the New Testament, I believe is the scribes and Pharisees when they see Jesus healing and casting out demons. And the reaction is, well, this isn't real miracles. Nor do they say, no, these aren't genuine miracles. But what do they say? They say, he cast out demons by the prince of demons, Beelzebub. And you have to step back and say, well, if this was chicanery, why didn't they call him on it? They could have. They had every motive to do so. But the best they can do is just say, no, this can't be from God. This has to come from some other preternatural source. In fact, not just any source. It has to come from the highest preternatural source, the prince of demons.
It's interesting you bring that up because we were talking before about the search for the historical Jesus. And one of the attempts was to say, well, Jesus had a medical doctor's bag in which he had all these medicines that the people didn't know. and he just hid that bag, or they didn't realize what it was, as if they didn't know what a doctor was.
Yeah.
Right. Which is crazy.
Sure.
And but they tried to explain it away.
Right.
And so did the Pharisees. But the Pharisees said, no, it's demonic. No, it's a hidden doctrine. But they can't deny the miracles.
That's right, absolutely. And there's all sorts of other interesting takes. For example, in the book of Acts, Luke says that Paul was in Ephesus for a while, made lots of converts, lots of miracles. And there's actually a pair of hostile witnesses there. For example, the 7 sons of Sceva, the high priest. Now, these are Jewish exorcists, the itinerant exorcists. They tried to drive out a demon by Jesus' name. And what happens is the demoniac says, Jesus I know, Paul I recognize, but who are you? And it turns against these Jewish exorcists, and they run.
Run? He beats them up and strips them naked, then they run.
The expurgated version. But, think about it.
I don't expurgate.
If you think about it, they must have saw this as a real phenomenon because they are, in a sense, ripping off Christians, thinking that we could use the name of Jesus too, because it seems to work for Christians. And so they're testing to a real phenomenon there.
Something that a number of people will bring up and as a question. Yeah, well, that's all the Bible stuff. And you Christians wrote that, but there's no evidence outside the Bible that Jesus existed. Did you find any hostile witnesses outside the New Testament?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
What you got?
Well, basically everyone in antiquity that spoke about Jesus believed as a real person. Yeah. Beginning with, let's say, Tacitus, a Roman historian, wrote about 112 A.D. around there.
Well, let's go back before we go to Tacitus, because earlier is Josephus.
Yes.
Who's a Jewish historian writing for Romans. Right. What did Josephus say? We'll just take it in sequence. He's not a Christian, is he?
Right. No, he's not. He's a Jew, Pharisee, although he did travel from place to place.
Right.
And
and he's trying to sidle on up to the Romans. So what did he write?
Well, he has a real interesting section where he talks about Jesus. He says that Jesus worked many wondrous deeds. And almost, he wonders whether he could be called a man because of all his wondrous deeds. He spoke about the crucifixion, and he also makes a reference about his followers are still lingering around. This is about 100 A.D. They're still around, and they claim that he rose from the dead. So starting right there, now Josephus he could omit Jesus altogether, and his work stands. But he sees him as a real historic figure who walked in Judea, did miracles, was crucified, and his followers are still following his footsteps, which probably for him was a head scratcher because they're following an executed, Jewish rabbi. Why would you follow an executed man? But he also says because they claim that he's still alive.
Yeah, and he's doing so, let's say in the 90s, maybe as late as 100. Yeah. And this is a time when persecution against Christians by the Emperor Domitian is going on. So he wouldn't be trying to win favor with the Romans by saying anything nice about Christians. But he's just reporting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now go to Tacitus.
All right, Tacitus. He's a Roman historian, a senator. He's also a member of this council.
Christian?
No, he's pagan.
Okay.
He is a member of this council of 15 priests who oversaw foreign religions in Rome. So he knows foreign religions like the back of his hand. And in one of his...
That's his job.
Yeah. So he mentions Jesus. He says that, I believe he calls him Christus, and believes that's a name, which is kind of funny because it's actually a title, Christ is anointed. He received the supreme punishment during the reign of Tiberius under Pontius Pilate. And he, of course, the extreme penalty he's talking about is crucifixion. And then he says, and then the movement, once suppressed, broke out again and has spread all over the empire. Now, remember, if Jesus never existed, why would Tacitus even mention him? If it was, let's say, a pagan myth that was amalgamation of pagan myths, he would know more than anybody. He was part of this council overseeing pagan religions. He could just say, well, this is kind of a Mithraism repackaged, and his readers would know.
Mithraism was a popular religion within the Roman army that came from the east of the empire.
Right.
It had to do with trying to reconcile astrology because the astrological signs had gotten out of alignment due to the precession of the earth. So that was another religion that was popular with soldiers, but Tacitus, didn't say that it was that kind of mythic astrological nonsense.
And one thing you notice about Tacitus, he's a very pithy writer. It's very difficult to read in a sense. It would have been so much easier if Christianity was some sort of amalgamation where Jesus never existed and it was put together or fabricated. It'd be so much easier for him to say it's like such and such a pagan religion. But instead, no, he anchors it in the historic person who lived during the reign of Tiberius, suffered under Pontius Pilate, and was executed.
In something to corroborate some of this too, in another lay apologist's writings, St. Justin Martyr, who lived, a few years later. He's writing, 20 and 30 years later. But he mentions that the records of the trial of Jesus were still in the Roman record room, that he said, you can go see them, and that's how they knew it was Pontius Pilate and under Tiberius.
Yes.
So these records were still around in the 2nd century. They got burned by the Visigoths in 410. Yeah. But who else do you have there from the pagan world that didn't like Jesus?
Oh,
but witnesses.
Suetonius.
Suetonius,
yeah, he was a companion of, he was a friend of Tacitus. I think he actually worked for another hostile witness, Pliny the Younger. Mm-hmm. And he has a little line about Christianity. Again, he calls him Crestus. That I forgot who the emperor was.
Claudius.
Claudius, thank you. Claudius expelled the Jews from Rome because of the instigation of Crestus.
Right.
And what's interesting there is, who's this Crestus fella, and why would it cause a controversy? And of course, he's a pagan, so he thinks Crestus is a proper name. Right. Not a title.
Right.
But I think what's going on there is, this is an argument about the Messiah. Remember, Paul goes city to city arguing in the synagogue about what? That the Messiah had to suffer, rise from the dead, and Jesus of Nazareth is the Messiah. So the whole thing's about whether or not he's the Messiah.
Right, and when you think about how early that is, Claudius' decree expelling all the Jews was in 49 AD, and one of the people, two of the people that were expelled were Paul's friends, Aquila and Prisca.
Right.
In Corinth, they had been expelled, and then they got to go back after Claudius died.
Yes.
But you see that these historical things. Any other pagans you got?
Pliny the Younger is a real interesting one. There's two interesting things. First is, he's a bean counter. Okay, he grew up in a noble family, but really his claim to fame is he's good in finance. So he gets appointed as governor of Bithynia and Pontus, which is northeast Turkey.
Right.
And he runs into a problem. So he writes a letter to the Emperor Trajan. And he says, I'm persecuting these Christians like I'm supposed to, but I'm having difficulty about whether or not, how this should be done. So in order to find out whether they deserve punishment, he tortures 2 deaconesses, and he also questions some former Christians. And he basically lays out, he says, all Christians do is engage in this superstition. They gather together on a particular day of the week. They sing a hymn to Jesus as to a God, okay, which is interesting because that's this goes back to Philippians, right?
Right.
And then they make solemn vows to keep their oaths and so on. And then he says they break for a while, they come back and they partake of food. And he has this little incidental thing. He says, but only ordinary and innocent food. So you have to stop and think, well, what was he expecting to find? Apparently something extraordinary and not very innocent.
Yeah.
And when you look at how other pagans viewed Christianity, it seems he's talking about the real presence of Christ, that he heard that we consume Christ's body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Eucharist. And so he was expecting to actually see flesh and blood being consumed.
Yeah, he thought they were very commonly Romans thought that the Christians were cannibals.
Yes.
Because they're talking about eating the body and drinking the blood.
Right. Now, notice this points that the earliest Christians that he knew believed in a substantial presence of Christ. And how I argue that is, you never see Baptists being accused of cannibalism when they partake of the Lord's Supper. But you always have Catholics get accused of cannibalism by Baptists. So for these pagans to think that there's actual cannibalism going on, they must have believed in a substantial presence of Christ, like the Catholic Church, not like a symbolic presence.
Exactly. And I think it's that double witness to the real presence of Christ's body, blood, soul, and divinity, and he's really present in the Eucharist, that really is Christ, and that they worship him as a God.
Yes.
Because you have people like Dan Brown from the Da Vinci Code saying that Constantine invented that notion. It's not true.
Right. Yeah.
This is 200 plus years before Constantine is emperor.
Yeah. One other thing too with Pliny, like I said, he is a bean counter, and a lot of people miss this at the end of his letter. He's talking to Trajan, and it seems like he wants to continue to persecute Christians. He's okay with the idea. But he says, because it's becoming effective, we notice that now pagans are coming back to their temples to worship. And he says that even the markets that have sacrificial meat is starting to revive. Now, it's also become common today to suggest that Christianity didn't grow at a huge, expansive rate. But what's interesting with Pliny is, he's showing that the microeconomy in Pontus and Bithynia had suffered because so many pagans left their faith to become Christians that people who sold sacrificial meats were going out of business.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So in a way, he kind of attests to, this must have been a huge, expansive growth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And Paul and Peter both had been in that region. Peter had been in Bithynia preaching, and Paul was not too far away in Galatia.
Yes. And also in Ephesus, remember,
Yes.
With the 7 sons of Sceva, there's a near riot that breaks out in the temple of Artemis, which was one of the ancient 7 wonders of the world. If you remember, Demetrius is the one who starts it. And what does he say? He says, if this Christian thing continues, more or less, he says, then we're going to be out of work making trinkets for the temple Artemis. And that starts almost a near riot. And what's interesting is what's happened with Pliny the Younger is essentially happened back in the book of Acts in Ephesus, because the microeconomy of Ephesus is apparently being threatened by this explosive growth of Christians.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that this brings out is that a number of pagans, and there were more pagans that you bring in there, but a number of them were well aware of Christ and testified to his real existence, that they knew him as an historical character, and they didn't like him, but they knew of him.
Yes.
And this is all important, but you also go on to talk all the way into the modern times. For instance, you bring up the much later period, the attitudes towards the church.
Yes. For
instance, what'd you find out about the Inquisition?
The Inquisition, yes. No one expects the Spanish Inquisition. Actually, there are a few hostile witnesses that speak to it. First, I start with a fellow named Charles Henry Lay, who is a Protestant historian who wrote a 3-volume set on the Inquisition. And he had a decidedly anti-Catholic bent. Now, the first thing, Father, when we talk about the Inquisition is there's no such thing as the Inquisition.
Exactly.
There were many Inquisitions in Rome and southern France and so on, but we usually think of the Spanish Inquisition as the. So anyway, Charles Lay points out something really interesting. There was an Inquisition that was in southern France to suppress a heresy known as Albigensian, or sometimes they're called Cathari. And this was a very deadly heresy because it had lots of different implications. They believed there was an evil God who created matter and a good God that created all spirit, and therefore you shouldn't have children, and suicide was encouraged.
Even it was Some of them made suicide a sacrament.
Yes.
You think they were running for office in Oregon, Washington, and Maine.
Exactly. And, you know, also, since the evil God is a material God, then government is evil. And so they didn't feel like they had to follow the king. You know, they didn't swear any oaths to the king. So what Charles Lee says is the Catholic Church did us a favor, because had this heresy been allowed to run amok, it would have destroyed civilization. Even if he says, even if they were kept on equal terms with the Christians, it would have destroyed everything.
Yeah.
So he wasn't happy about how it was done, but despite his anti-Catholic bias, he said,
recognized.
you need to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And then, you know, and some of the people were also talking, because I was looking at a very viciously anti-Catholic website. It was by some break-off group of evangelicals. They weren't any mainline church evangelicals at all, but they were saying, you know, tens of millions of people were killed by the Inquisition.
Yes.
The Catholic Church is the most vicious organization and most violent organization in history.
Yes.
Well, tell us, what did you find about that viciousness and violence?
I bring up a hostile witness. His name is Juan Antonio Lorente. And he was a secretary for the Inquisition in Madrid around the 1790s. And actually he ran into some problems to get kicked out and fined. And so he had an axe to grind against his former employer. And around this time, Napoleon decided to invade Spain. And so he joined the Napoleon side, which eventually failed. And then he wrote this tell-all book. Well, anyway, at the end, he gives his own computation about how many people were killed under the Spanish Inquisition. And he comes up with a number about 30,000, somewhere around there.
Now, did you say 30,000, not 30 million?
Not 30 million. Yeah, it seems that zeros were added later on because apparently it wasn't a big enough number.
Now that sounds like the federal budget, but go ahead.
Yeah, but even then, it's exactly, and it's probably the same kind of methodology. In fact, Henry Lee actually says that his computations were all wrong. It wasn't 30,000 killed.
How many was it then?
Well, what we found is, and this is not Catholic scholars, but Jewish and secular scholars, have gone through the archives, because the wonderful thing about the Inquisition, it was kind of a bureaucracy.
What?
It had lots of
they
records.
Recorded everything.
Yeah, and the number actually is, you know, over its entire history, roughly about 2,000 people were executed. That's a big drop from 30,000 or 3 million.
Yeah, and this is an Inquisition in Spain, right?
Yes, and this is only
and
in
that
Spain.
goes from the 1490s until early 1800s.
Yes, yes.
So over, a little bit over 300 years, 2,000. I mean, there were more executed in the 200 years of United States history.
Yes.
And one of the other things to keep in mind, when you hear these big numbers, what was the population of Spain? You brought this up,
yeah.
That to be killing 50 million people, what was the population of Spain?
Yeah, it would have been about a third of the entire population of Europe if these inflated numbers were true.
Yeah, because I think at different times the population of Europe was, in the Middle Ages, only 25 million.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, it's wildly inflated, to say the least.
Yeah. I saw a feminist article claiming that the church had killed 9 million women witches.
Wow.
And I said, wait a minute. That would, out of a population of 25 million, that would be 3/4 of all the women.
Yeah.
You'd have any other war would pale in comparison to fighting over the last 1/3 of the women.
Yeah, apparently millions didn't expect the Spanish Inquisition either, you know.
Yeah, no. But these are nonsensical statements with no grounding in reality. And that's what I appreciate. You go to the enemies of the church who still are looking at the evidence.
Right.
And you see that despite themselves, the evidence provided by these enemies of the church, it undoes the mythological things said about modern day enemies of the church
Yes.
against the church. And They're actually witnesses to the church not being what people say, or Christ. We have to take a break. I wish we could keep going for a couple hours, but we're going to take a break. We want to come back with some of your questions. You have some questions about your own hostilities or people you know that are hostile to the church. You want to ask some of those questions, come on in, call in, and we'd love to hear from you. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much, and welcome back. First, I want to invite you to come and do what these nice people have done. They're from all the way from Florida to New Mexico and Michigan and Washington and all kinds of places, and we'd love to have you come and join us as well. If you can, call our pilgrimage department at 205-271-2966. Or go to our website, EWTN.com. They'll give you information about all kinds of places you can stay and eat, of course, and the schedule of masses, programs you can be in our audience, directions to get up to handsful and pray with the sisters. So come on down. We love having you here. You ready for some questions?
Absolutely.
Let's giddy up. Start off with John. Hello, John.
Hello, Father Mitch.
Hey, John, what's up?
Oh, not too much here in Ohio. It's a very warm winter.
Yes, it is. We're getting ready we already got flowers out. So what's your question tonight, John?
Well, it's good I went number one. The death and then the resurrection of Jesus are really the bottom line of all apologetics, isn't it? And maybe you and your guest can tell us where we go from there. In talking to, we met a guy recently that was raised in Catholicism, and bad examples bummed him out, and he doesn't believe anymore. Yeah. So I'll hang up.
Okay. That's first of all, one very important point. You know, St. Peter brings up in that same line in 1 Peter 3:15 that, you know, be always ready to give a defense for your hope, but also do so with gentleness. And he basically says to give a good witness, because that's very important for a lot of people. Yes. But, you know, in terms of being able to explain, you know, evidence for the death and resurrection and its reality, you already mentioned Tacitus. Right. What else do you have as evidence?
Well, here's something interesting. Yeah, well, I mean, you start with you can see in the book of Acts with Rabban Gamaliel, who they arrested Peter and John, who were performing miracles in the temple area. And when they left the room, he addresses the Sanhedrin and says, brothers, you know that there was Judas the Galilean who purported to be somebody important. Hundreds of people followed him, and he died and they were dispersed. And then there's another fellow named Thaddeus who said he was important. He died. They were dispersed. So he counsels the Sanhedrin. Well, you know, he's saying basically Jesus has been executed. Let him go, because if it's of God, it'll stay. But if it isn't, it'll disperse.
In fact, if it's of God, you can't stop it.
Right. Exactly. And that's where one of those threads that I found running throughout history is the persistence of the church. It just defies reason and logic. The church should have died when Jesus was crucified. And so you see Rabban Gamaliel saying that. You also see Josephus, who says these followers are still around, even though, Jesus was executed. Tacitus, same thing. Jesus received the supreme punishment, and yet, it broke out again. How do you explain this evidence? Why is it that Christianity persists when its leader is dead? And of course, the answer is our leader isn't dead. He rose on the third day. In fact, you could go all the way back. The last part of this thread is in World War II. I believe it's Heinrich Himmler writes a report. Yeah, I have Nazis in my book.
Yes.
Heinrich Himmler says how Catholicism is undermining the Nazi program and demoralizing people. And one thing he notes is that Catholics are saying that politics are transient, but the church has always remained and always will remain. And he saw that as a stab against the Third Reich, who was going to last for 1,000 years. So you can see that thread starting in the New Testament, going all the way through history, the pagans scratching their heads saying, why isn't this movement dying? Their leader's dead.
As a matter of fact, the 1,000-year Third Reich lasted, 12 years?
Yeah.
And
36 to 45, wasn't it?
Well, 33 when he became Reich Chancellor.
Yeah.
And then the church, 2000. And I think also another point, too, about the resurrection. We see Peter and John twice put on trial for healing the cripple and then for preaching again. And it's something that struck me after my many visits to Jerusalem. The Sanhedrin is meeting in a building that is at most on a busy day a 15-minute walk from the tomb of Christ. So if they said, wait a minute, your Jesus is dead and in the tomb. Let's go, we'll go show everybody. It's right there. And they don't do it. Secondly, they never accuse the apostles of stealing the body either. That was a crime. And you even bring that up, that the Roman Empire made it a crime to move somebody's body.
Yeah, the Nazareth inscription.
Right. And so, if Jesus was still dead, they could very easily say, oh, come on, you guys, stop it. We'll go see the body.
Right.
And they never do.
Right.
And they never deny the resurrection. All they do is say, stop talking about it and blaming us. That's all their argument is. And that's very interesting. Take a look again at Acts 4 and 5, and you'll see that 3 to 5. Let's take another question from our studio audience. Sir, where are you from?
We're from Burlington, Iowa.
Good to have you here. Welcome.
And
your question?
Is there truth to the assertions that much of the Inquisition and resulting executions was due to political, it was more political than it was worrying about faith and religion?
Interesting question. What did you find about the role of politics in the Inquisition?
Yes, and I feel bad about this because I included him even though he's a good Catholic. King Ferdinand of Aragon, Ferdinand and Isabella thing. The Pope received complaints from Catholics who were being accused of being secret converts from Islam. And the Pope received enough complaints that he wanted to correct things. And so he was going to write a brief to put things into order in the Spanish Inquisition. Well, King Ferdinand, who's all other respects a good Catholic, writes this letter to the Pope where he basically threatens the Holy Father to say, if you're going to try to implement these corrective measures, I'm going to do everything in my power to stop it. So he said basically, stay out of this. This is more of a governmental affair.
And the issue for King Ferdinand is that he had just ended the last stronghold of Muslim occupation in Spain.
Yes.
And he was afraid they might try to come back. So for him, it was a very political issue. And he was afraid of the Jewish people because many of them had worked in the Muslim government, and they were afraid that they were a fifth column. So it was a very political issue for him, and the Pope was trying to say, wait a second, we want the religious issues involved here. And he was trying to maintain power.
Absolutely, yeah, it becomes a government affair from then on out.
Let's take another call. We have Cher on the line. Hello, Cher, where are you from?
Well, hello, blessings from Montana, Father Mitch.
Montana, what a beautiful state that is.
Yes, it is, and it is cold, and we have snow.
Wow, and she sounds happy about it.
Yeah.
Well, I've got God in my heart. Of course I'm happy.
Good, good, good. And what's your question tonight, Cher?
My question is to both of you. Now, I am taking RCIA classes. I am converting from Methodist to Catholic. I grew up in a non-religious home, so I never really knew about God and Jesus or anything. I'm 65, and a year ago, this coming May, I gave my life to Christ.
Cool.
He came knocking on my door, and Mother Angelica, she sealed the deal.
That sounds like her.
My question to you is, I have learned in my classes that it was the Catholic, that it was Christ and his disciples that helped to found the Catholic Church during his last 3 years of his ministry, and that they also helped to write the Bible. I have Catholic and Protestant friends who do not believe me, and I do not know how to prove it to them.
Sure.
What do I say?
All right. So how do you show in the New Testament that Jesus himself and his apostles founded the Catholic Church? Where's that in your Bible?
Well, you could go to Matthew 16, 17, 18, 19.
Where happens there?
Changes Simon's name to Peter, which means rock. And upon this rock, he's going to build his church, and he gives him the keys of the kingdom and also the power to bind and loose with heavenly authority.
So and Christ uses the word church in that passage, so that, that you're the rock on which I will build my church. And it's not, this is the rock on which Constantine will build my, no, that's not there, is it?
No, not at all.
No, Jesus says, I will build my church. And also in Matthew 18, he speaks of the church, and the role of the apostles to bind and loose.
Yes. And it's interesting that Peter gets that twice. He gets it in Matthew 16, he gets it in Matthew 18. And what I believe is going on there is the context. When Jesus is talking to Peter, he's talking about the universal church, his church. But in Matthew 18, this is the reconciliation of a sinner with the local church. So I believe that part is he's making them bishops, over their diocese. So they're ordinaries over the diocese, where Peter is a bishop. The Pope is the Bishop of Rome, but he's also the pontiff. So Matthew 16, 18 shows the universal authority of the Pope.
And then you also see in Acts of the Apostles that the church meets.
Yes.
You see St. Paul teach about the church in 1 Corinthians 12, Romans 12, and Ephesians 4, and a number of other places. So it's throughout. And then finally at the end, book of Revelation. The bride of Christ is the church.
Absolutely.
So tell your friends who are arguing about it, they better get with the program. Because being part of the church is being on the right side at the end of time with the book of Revelation. You're a member of the body of Christ, or you're in trouble.
Yeah.
All right. You have another question from the audience. Sir, where are you from?
From Michigan.
Great to have you here. And what's your question?
I just wanted to ask, in writing this book, how difficult was it to do the research to get this?
Good question.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't difficult at all. I started apologetics in the early 90s, right around when Catholic Answers was just getting their magazine out and so on. So occasionally I'd run across something where I would look at it and say, this is really interesting evidence because it seems to assume Jesus did miracles, or it seems to assume you know, the church is growing or whatever. And so I'd pack it away. And over the years, it just kept growing and growing until finally I thought, well, I might have a book here from all these different quotes. And what was really surprising, too, is, you know, I thought it would be a nice apologetic manual, something Catholics could use as counter evidence for claims. But what I found out is once I put them all together chronologically, you start seeing all these patterns through history where these hostile witnesses who are completely different people, different cultures, different times, all consistently attest to encountering this supernatural phenomenon in the church.
You know, I knew a convert back in Nashville, Tennessee when I was in grad school. And she actually had tried a number of different denominations, you know, when she was moving in her own conversion to know Christ, not unlike Cher. You know, she came to know Christ, but which church do I join? And so she was going around. She said, I noticed two things everywhere I went. One Sunday a month, they would have Communion Sunday. And this was very common in a lot of the churches. And secondly, where she was going, she found that there was the anti-Catholic sermon Sunday. So one Sunday a month was the anti-Catholic sermon, and one Sunday, and she was just happened to be watching an old TV commercial in which the speaker says, how come RC compares itself to Coke, Pepsi compares itself to Coke, and these others all compare, because Coke is the real thing.
Yeah.
And she said, wait a minute, all these folks are comparing themselves to Catholicism.
Yes.
It must be the real thing.
Yeah.
And then she became a Catholic. You know, she had no, you know, real connection. But that's a very important, you know, principle, because you see that with all these people.
Exactly.
You know, they're all doing that.
Yeah.
Let's take another caller. We have Dan. Hello, Dan.
Hey, Father Mitch, how are you?
Oh, fine. It's Frog here. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Fort Wright, Kentucky.
Ain't you something? Now, what is your question?
Well, having read Gary's book, I wanted to be a positive witness and let you know that it is fantastic if you haven't read it. And he has an awesome section on Julian the Apostate, and I was hoping he could talk about that for a minute.
Oh, great. That is a good section. Tell us, who is Julian the Apostate?
Oh, well,
and
Julian...
what kind of last name is Apostate?
Yeah, exactly. What a bad family to belong to, huh?
Yeah, really.
Yeah, his family was murdered by the descendants of Constantine.
Yes, Constantine's sons killed all them because they were cousins.
Yes, and so he was spared along with another cousin. And so I think he blamed Christianity for the murder. He saw this as, you know, how could you be Christian and do this to my family? So eventually, you know, make a long story short, he became emperor, and he decided to reinvigorate.
By the way, because all the Constantine's sons killed each other off, too.
Yeah. He became emperor, and he decided to make a program to reinvigorate paganism, which had gone into hard times since Constantine, even before that. And we're talking about the real thing. Part of his program, we have letters from him that he wrote to pagan high priests, instructing them to make sure the priests underneath them start acting like Christians. Start acting moral, don't go to games, not have a bad occupation.
Be generous to the poor.
Yes, yes.
Because the Roman religious institutions were never involved in taking care of the poor,
right,
or the sick.
Yeah, that would be absurd. Why
them,
throw money away on them?
Exactly.
So he even had government subsidies that he was allocating food for these pagan temples to give to any poor that came to them, hoping that this would generate membership. And like you said, Father, you know, they're copying the real thing. If the best you can do is to try to become a pagan knockoff of Catholicism, you know, you're already on the road to ruin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we did this book some time ago, The Apostasy That Never Was.
Oh, yes.
You know,
Rod Bennett.
Rod's a friend of yours as well,
Yeah.
I understand. And he talked about it. They said, one of the very important things to know about Julian the Apostate is that he never knew any Orthodox Christians. He didn't know any Catholics.
Right.
The only Christians he knew were Arian heretics. The Bishop Eusebius of Nicomedia, who was one of the leaders of the Arian movement that denied the divinity of Jesus Christ, and therefore, you know, that undermines the whole faith. So his version, what he knew of Christianity from Constantine's family, who were also Arian heretics, and from Eusebius of Nicomedia, is that, you know, it was watered down would be being too positive.
Right.
You know, it was a false form of, it would be like, you know, the only Christians you ever met were Jehovah's Witnesses, who are actually much nicer than these other folks.
Yeah.
And so he didn't really know, you know, real Christianity.
No.
And that's what he rejected.
Yeah.
You know, because as Rod Bennett brings out in that book, which you can get from our catalog, it's very much important to know that the Arian heresy was really an attempt to accommodate a few nice things about Christianity with pagan culture. And that's what they were doing. Take another call. We have Owen on the line. Owen, where are you from?
I'm from near Boston, Massachusetts, Father.
Oh, great, Owen. Then what is your question?
My question is about Galileo. I recently heard a statement on national radio that Galileo was almost tortured to death, which I think is absurd. But if your guest would maybe say whether or not he was employed by a Catholic university and was treated quite nicely, that's what I think.
Owen, was this on NPR?
No, it was on a national show, and the guy that ran the show was not able to say anything about Galileo. No.
Okay, so I was going to say NPR usually is better informed, but this was somebody who was ignorant, making of the facts and making these claims. Was Galileo tortured by the church and nearly tortured to death?
Absolutely not, unless you think reciting a penitential psalm once a day for a few years is torture. That was at the first trial. The second trial, he was put in house arrest in a chalet, you know, with servants and family members and
his daughter.
Yeah.
And Italian food. Yeah. Every day.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, both Galileo's daughters became nuns. So if he was tortured to death, why did these religious vocations come from, right?
And didn't he maintain friendship with a lot of Jesuit priests who were also astronomers?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He kept. He was not tortured at all.
No.
This is nonsense. Yeah. Nonsense. And the church did not say that he was wrong either. That's another important thing. The church did not say that his idea about the earth going around the sun was wrong. We didn't teach that. What they said was two things. You don't have enough evidence to assert this yet. You have to come up with the evidence. Right. And secondly, stop calling the Pope nasty names.
Yes. That's exactly right.
That's what they got him for. Yeah. Don't say bad things. Because he was very... And the Pope was himself a really excellent mathematician.
Yeah, and a fan of Galileo, both popes.
Yeah, he liked him.
Yeah.
But he knew enough science not to let Galileo get away with making scientific claims without the evidence. He had used the tides as proof that the earth goes around the sun. Right. That's proof that the moon goes around the earth.
Right.
So, look, we want you to get Gary Michuta's book, Hostile Witnesses, How the Historic Enemies of the Church Prove Christianity, at EWTNRC.com, or you can call them 1-800-854-6316, item number 6CB18. Also, you can get the book by Rod Bennett as well, The Apostasy That Never Happened. Great stuff. We've run flat out of time.
Yeah.
It's been fun. May the Lord bless all of you and keep you and cause His face to shine upon you, the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit, and give you His joy. And we can bring great guests, like Gary and Rod and all the other folks who give us great information, because this network is brought to you by you. So please keep us in between your gas bill, your electric bill, and your cable bill. And God willing, we'll be able to pay all of our bills too. Thank you, and God bless.